Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 623, and today is June 26th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I have some fantastic news to talk about in today's show. Really excited to get into all the news today. First, very quickly, if you could, share the show, hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com. If you're new to the show, make sure you subscribe to it somewhere. It's hosted at YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee, and also anywhere you could get your audio podcasts. And of course, you could follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_, where I post all the stories I write, all the shows I put out, and other things I think are important or other appearances I have on other shows. Now, let's get into the news today. First up here is this great article, no, not the article great, but the news in the article great, that I wrote for antiwar.com on June 25th. Assange finally free after judge accepts plea deal. So, after a day of traveling across Eurasia, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange arrived in the U.S. territory of the Northern Mariana Islands for a court date. Assange was forced to plead guilty to secure his freedom after over 10 years of confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and UK's Belmarsh prison. On Wednesday, Assange pleaded guilty to one count of violating the Espionage Act. Following a prearranged agreement, the journalist was sentenced to 62 months in prison, time he already served in the UK. After the conclusion of the trial, Assange was free to return to his home country of Australia. During the court proceedings, Assange said he was guilty of violating the Espionage Act. This is a quote of his, and of course there weren't any live cameras in the press room, so there was a very good local journalist who was doing some coverage, and there were some international mainstream outlets that were covering as well. So I did my best to really nail down and make sure that these quotes are right, although of course I couldn't actually hear Assange myself. So he told the court, working as a journalist, I encouraged my source to provide classified information to publish it. I believe the First Amendment protected that. I accept it's a violation of the espionage statute. The First Amendment and the Espionage Act are in contradiction. When Judge Ramona Mangola asked the journalist if he fully admitted his guilt, his legal team responded that Assange understands that no court has held there's a First Amendment defense to the Espionage Act, and he is pleading guilty on that basis. For Assange, the plea ended more than a decade of torment at the hands of U.S. authorities after his outlet WikiLeaks published troves of embarrassing and incriminating classified documents. Before the sentence was announced, the U.S. Justice Department official Matthew McKenzie admitted there was no personal victim here and that Assange's actions did not harm anyone. After Judge Mangola sentenced Assange, she remarks, "It appears this case ends here with me," referring, and then civil rights groups deemed the Espionage Act charges against Assange as a grave threat to press freedom. Historically, Washington has only attempted to charge leakers for handling state secrets to outlets, not the journalists who published those documents. Publishing classified information and getting classified information from journalists is considered to be a standard journalistic practice, and encouraging the journalists to give up more information, as Assange did, all considered to be standard journalistic practices, things that the New York Times, Washington Post could do on a daily basis if they were real outlets, but it relies on people like Julian Assange and the folks over at the Gray Zone or Glenn Greenwald and people like that to really bring the truth to the people, because so often our mainstream media lets us down. So one thing, there's this whole argument here that Assange made a mistake because the plea deal will set a legal precedent and empowers the Justice Department to target journalists. However, Bruce Afran, a constitutional lawyer who spoke with Consortium News, argued that Assange's plea deal will not expand the Justice Department's powers to target journalists. He said, "A plea deal is not a precedent. A precedent consists of a decision interpreting a matter by law by an appeals court that will govern future cases of the same legal principle. In contrast, a plea is merely a factual agreement by a given defendant that they did a certain act, but it does not bind defendants in similar cases. And so that's where I think the precedent doesn't apply. Now, I do think it's important to talk about this in the reality of the American empire, right? Because he's talking about it by the rule of law. He's a constitutional scholar. However, by and large, the Constitution is dead, and so is rule of law in America. And the rule of law is more what we allow our government to get away with versus what they are actually allowed to do by the letter of the law. And so in some respects there, I think this was a good precedent because it really was, I think, the widespread public support, and this is part of what WikiLeaks has said, that really forced the government into having to do this. I think otherwise the government would have been very happy just to, continue to drag this out with Assange, and this plea deal came because of the public pressure. Now, the other thing, I guess worth pointing out, is they did remove one of the most important, if not the most important journalist on the face of the planet, certainly the most important opposition journalist on the face of the planet, for over 10 years. And that's a precedent that they're probably very happy to repeat, even if, at the end of the day, they didn't persecute or prosecute Assange and throw him in jail the way they wanted to, or the way they had charged him. So, I think there's good precedent here in that we were able to force the government to let Assange go. I think there's bad precedent here in how long they were able to keep him locked up. So WikiLeaks has credited widespread public support for us with Assange. Prior to accepting the plea agreement, Assange's supporters were concerned about the 52-year-old's health after so many years in prison. I believe he turns 53 next week. Additionally, they were worried that if he were extradited to the U.S., he would not survive the process. WikiLeaks has credited widespread public support for Assange for helping pressure the U.S. government to accept the plea deal. Assange's, he was, when I wrote this article, expected to leave for Australia. Right before I recorded, he did arrive in Australia, and I mean, just so happy for not only him, but his wife Stella, the boys. There's a picture of him with his wife Stella Assange as he arrives. It's absolutely beautiful. Just so happy that not only did we get, not we as in I personally did something, but the Free Assange movement that has so many incredibly important names in it, were able to work to get, again, one of our most important journalists out of jail. Is just so massive, and very excited. Now, there's one last kick in the balls here from the U.S. for Julian Assange. Julian's freedom came with the final massive price tag for the journalist. The Australian government charged him over $500,000 for his flights that took approximately 48 hours. They went from the UK to Bangkok, from Bangkok to the US territory, and from there to Australia. By the way, that is the US territory district court that is furthest away. There's 92 U.S. district courts. That one is the furthest away from Washington, D.C. Interesting, that's where he ends up. So Assange's team is seeking some donations to help cover the cost. Maybe they could get somebody who's got a lot of money to come in and just pay this off for Assange. And again, he could just be a free man now. And while I think a lot of us hope that he will return to running WikiLeaks, he has certainly earned the right to retire if that's what he chooses to do. Hopefully he takes some time, gets to spend some nice quality time with his family, and then we'll see what comes from there. All right, next up into the regular programming, which is all bad news. Biden hopes Kenyan police will stabilize Haiti as chaos erupts in Nairobi. So as the first wave of Kenyan police arrived in Haiti on a mission to restore order, security forces in Nairobi opened fire on protesters, leaving at least 5 dead. On Tuesday, armed Kenyan police arrived in Haiti for a U.S.-supported mission aimed at taking power from gangs and handing it back to the Washington-installed government in Port-au-Prince. Biden celebrated the arrival in a statement published by the White House. He said, with strong support from the U.S., Kenyan force part of the multinational security support mission, arrived in Haiti, beginning an effort that will bring much needed relief to Haitians. This mission will support the Haitian National Police as they increase their anti-gang operations. So as a part of the spy off, it's also important to note that Washington made Nairobi a major non-NATO U.S. ally, which gives them priority access to American weapons, gives them additional training and technology, as well as gives them access to depleted uranium anti-armor tank rounds. So lots of benefits to being given that status. So Washington got the support of the UN Security Council to deploy the Kenyan troops to Haiti last year. UN peacekeepers have a dark history in Haiti, including creating a cholera outbreak that killed 10,000. Additionally, the previous multinational force deployed to Haiti committed rampant sexual assault against Haitian women, including minors. The White House claims that the current mission has important accountability and oversight measures. The State Department Human Rights Report on Kenya identified numerous crimes committed by Nairobi security forces. Kenyans have And so now let's switch over to what's happening in Kenya. Kenyans have been on the streets for weeks in opposition to a proposed tax hike of 16% on bread and 25% on cooking oil. On Tuesday, clashes erupted between protesters and police after the tax increase was passed. Protesters broke through police lines and stormed the Parliament building, which was partly set ablaze. Police opened fire on the rioters, killing at least five. That was as of last night. And then when I was writing this story, it was night in Kenya, so I was having a hard time just really nailing down many more details. This was what had come out of the international press. So I will take a look around today and make sure that the situation for the Kenyans hasn't gotten significantly worse. Security forces also deployed less lethal crowd tactics, including tear gas, and the half-sister of former President Barack Obama was tear gassed on camera. She was giving an interview at the time. So the Kenyan President William Ruto denounced the protesters as an existential threat to our republic and said their actions were treasonous. He said he deployed the military across the country to restore order. Now, one more thing I just want to add here is a lot of people are pointing to the major non-NATO ally status that Kenya received. I think that actually did become official right before this law was passed as the reason that these protests broke out. I'm not quite sure the two have anything to do with each other. That status was announced when Ruto met with Biden in May, and that was supposed to coincide with the arrival of the Kenyan troops to Haiti. The Kenyan troops to Haiti has been delayed for months and months and months, and that was because there were opposition challenges in Kenyan courts trying to prevent this. My guess is that the deployment to Haiti probably had more to do with the protests than the NATO, major non-NATO ally status. However, I'm not sure that either are really maybe even marginally responsible for what happened on the streets of Haiti, and it really does have all to do with this tax increase by the Haitian government. All right, now some stories on the situation in Israel. Netanyahu rejects any deal that will lead to a permanent end to the war in Gaza. I wrote this one June 24th, antiwar.com. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will only agree to a partial deal with Hamas that allows him to restart the assault after a pause to exchange hostages. The remarks show that Netanyahu is unwilling to sign on to the agreement proposed by President Joe Biden. On Sunday night, speaking with Channel 14, that's an Israeli outlet, and one that is favorable towards Netanyahu, Netanyahu said he was prepared to make a partial deal. This is not secret, he said, that we will return some of our people, but we are committed to continuing the war after the pause in order to complete the goal of eliminating Hamas, and I will not give up on that. An official who spoke with Channel 12 conveyed that, again, that's an Israeli outlet, conveyed that the partial deal is the best offer Hamas will get from Tel Aviv. The source explained, the mediators are unable to convey the idea to Hamas that there will be no better deal than the one proposed by Israel. We have reached a situation where there is no movement. Israel has gone as far as it could go. Biden has adopted this proposal. However, Netanyahu's temporary pause is a rejection of the three-phase deal that Biden proposed at the end of May that the president claimed originated in Tel Aviv. That agreement would see a ceasefire for negotiations and a hostage exchange. Phase 2 and 3 would see the Biden deal would call for Israel to withdraw from Gaza, a permanent end to the fighting, and the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. Biden's proposal resembles one put forward by Hamas months ago. The Palestinian group said it viewed the White House's offer positively, but sought to amend the deal to make the Israelis' concessions more concrete. Both Tel Aviv and Washington have continued to present Hamas as being the barrier to the agreement, and this includes on Tuesday, I guess it was, both Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and Linda Thomas Greenfield, our ambassador to the United Nations. Both said we're just waiting on Hamas to accept the deal, and I mean, this is baffling to me. Like, I've really been trying to figure out if there's something I don't understand here, because you have Netanyahu repeatedly and publicly saying that he will not agree to a permanent end to the war and will restart the fighting after the pause, which inherently contradicts the proposal that Biden put forward. And so either you're waiting on Israel, not Hamas, to accept that proposal, or the government is just lying. I mean, just blatantly lying to the American people in the most shameful, thoughtless way possible. I mean, again, I've just found it utterly baffling, and it to be one. I mean, the Biden administration has spun some pretty disgusting lies over the past 8 months, but this seems to be one of the most blatant and one of the worst. All right, so remember there, one of the things that Netanyahu said was the fighting will restart after the hostage exchange because we must eliminate Hamas. We now have a second Netanyahu advisor saying Hamas cannot be eliminated. Wrote this one for antiwar.com on June 25th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top national security aide said that Hamas is an idea and cannot be defeated. His comments put him at odds with the Israeli leader, who has pledged to eradicate the Palestinian militant group. At a conference on Tuesday, National Security Advisor Hanagbi said, "You cannot completely get Hamas to disappear because it's an idea, a concept, so you need a competing alternative concept, and that would be local leadership willing to live side by side with Israel and not devote its life to killing Israelis." The remarks are similar to those made by the Israeli Defense Force spokesman, that is Hagari, who explained that Netanyahu's stated objective in Gaza was unachievable. He said, "This business of destroying Hamas, making Hamas disappear, is simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a party. It's rooted in the hearts of the people. Whoever thinks we could eliminate Hamas is wrong." And one thing to go back to Hanagbi's remarks is that, he's saying that we want a group that we could live side by side with and won't devote its life to killing Israelis. Well, he's saying that, Hamas, all they want to do is kill the Jews, right? That's what you always hear from Tel Aviv. That's why they have to do what they're doing in Gaza, because it's simply impossible to live side by side with the people who are currently there. The problem is, and he kind of identifies this, but not really, is the reason that there are militants in Gaza who are willing to fight the Israelis and even, kill Israeli citizens and things like that, is because the Israelis had their boots so tightly on the necks of the Palestinian people living in Gaza, they essentially have no lives. And so you can't go back to keeping 2.3 million people pent up in what is essentially an open air prison and not expect them to violently try to resist their imprisonment. That's absolutely what any normal group of people would do. And he kind of identifies that in his statement, but then he says, we just need to get a different group in charge. So After Hagari made his statements, Netanyahu quickly walked them back. The leader issued a statement saying the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities is one of the goals of the war. The Israeli military is, of course, committed to this. Hanegbi provided some vague details on how he sees the war in Gaza developing. The National Security Advisor claimed that Israel would neutralize Hamas's armed and political wings, then set up an alternative. He claimed that Israel would begin establishing this alternative to Hamas in northern Gaza in the coming days. He said, I expect that in the coming days, we will see a concrete realization of this plan. We believe in it, and it will put Hamas under great pressure. However, Tel Aviv insisted it defeated Hamas in northern Gaza in January. At the time, Hagari told reporters that the IDF had completed the dismantling of Hamas's command structure in the north. In May, Israeli forces reinvaded those areas of the Strip and again fought members of the Palestinian resistance group. The Israeli National Security Advisor said that fighting in Gaza will come to an end if the international community pressures Hamas to accept an Israeli proposed ceasefire agreement. It is unclear what agreement he is referring to, as Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that Tel Aviv will not sign on to any deal that brings the conflict to an end. Hamas officials state they will release the Israeli hostages as a part of a deal that brings a permanent end to the war. All right, next up here. Oh, this is a horrible one. I wrote this one for antiwar.com on June 24th. Save the Children, 21,000 Gaza children missing. So Save the Children, which is an international organization, issued a startling new report suggesting that 21,000 Gazan children are missing as the Israeli onslaught drags on. Aside from those unaccounted for, at least 14,000 children have been confirmed killed. The report states that in the chaos of war, it's hard to locate missing children, but some are thought to be separated from their parents, while others are buried under the rubble or in mass graves. So the report says at least 17,000 children are believed to be unaccompanied and separated from their parents, and approximately 4,000 children are likely missing under the rubble, with an unknown number in mass graves. Others have been forcibly disappeared, including an unknown number detained and forcibly transferred out of Gaza, and so they would be in the Israeli torture prisons that we have reports there are children as young as 12 that have been brought in. Essentially, all the prisoners who have been released said that there were minors that were held in those camps. So this is Save the Children's regional director for the Middle East, Jeremy Stoner. No parent should have to dig through rubble or mass graves to try to find their child's body. No child should be alone, unprotected in a war zone. No child should be detained or held hostage. Gaza has become a graveyard for children, with thousands of others missing and their fates unknown. There must be an independent investigation, and those responsible must be held accountable. And one thing that they get into a little bit more in the article is just what this process is like for the parents. So you have thousands of parents who are now traveling to places where maybe they stayed, and they're trying to dig through the rubble to find the partially decomposed body of their child and hope that they can make an identification, or they're going to where they're digging up these mass graves and they're looking for some evidence, maybe of the clothing or something like that. Again, you're looking at decomposed, at times partially skeletal bodies now that parents are trying to identify if this is their child. I mean, that experience is, I don't even know how to articulate that misery. The Gaza Health Ministry reports that children account for 14,000 of the more than 37,000 confirmed Palestinian deaths over the past 8 months. Among the deaths and separated from family members, Gaza's children are facing numerous other severe challenges. And so one thing I want to point out here is that by this Save the Children account, the 14,000, you would add 4,000. So we got at least 18,000 dead children in Gaza with this Save the Children estimate. So the spokesperson for the UN Aid Agency for Children, UNICEF, James Elder, said in an interview with Democracy Now! That Israel's military operations in Gaza amount to a war on children. As the conflict continues, thousands of children are facing lack of food, water, and medical care. that is beginning to become lethal. The fighting in Gaza is unlikely to end anytime soon. Israeli leadership says it is planning to draw down some forces in the Strip and transition to a more limited phase of warfare. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has explained that he will not end operations until Hamas is eliminated, vowing to continue bombings and assassinations against the group, which we know have been largely indiscriminate and killed massive number of civilians. All right, this one here from Brett Wilkins, originally at Common Dreams. We reprinted it at antiwar.com. UN to warn 500,000 Gazans facing catastrophic food insecurity. So more than 1 in 5 people in the Gaza Strip are facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity amid Israel's relentless assault and siege against the Palestinian territory, according to a draft report set to be published on Tuesday by the United Nations Hunger Monitoring System. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, IPC, it is the international agency that kind of monitors if there's going to be a famine. Report is titled Acute Food Insecurity Snapshot, which was previewed by various news agencies, says that more than 495,000 Gazans who already face an extreme level of food and starvation and exhaustion are expected to suffer the highest level of starvation over the coming months. The draft report says that while a sharp increase in food aid in northern Gaza in March and April can be credited with likely averting famine, the situation is again deteriorating following renewed hostilities. A high risk of famine persists across the whole of the Gaza Strip as the conflict continues and humanitarian access is restricted, the IPC report noted. The IPC draft report also says that more than half of Gaza's households had to sell or swap clothing in order to obtain food, and that the majority of Gazan families do not have any food to eat in the house, and over 20% go entire days and nights without eating. The population cannot endure these hardships any longer. Kate Phillips Barrasso, vice president of the Global Policy and Advocacy at Mercy Corps, an Oregon-based humanitarian NGO, told The Guardian that the people are enduring subhuman conditions, resorting to desperate measures like boiling weeds, eating animal feed, and exchanging clothing for money to stave off hunger and keep their children alive. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating rapidly, and the specter of famine continues to hang over Gaza. The international community must apply relentless pressure to achieve the ceasefire and ensure that sustained humanitarian access now. The population cannot endure these hardships any longer. Although the IPC stopped short of the rare step of declaring a famine in Gaza, it warned that the recent trajectory is negative and highly unstable. Should this continue, the improvements seen in April could rapidly be reversed, the agency warned. The IPC's Famine Review Panel previously said there is not enough data to make a determination on whether there is a famine in Gaza, since research was being blocked by conflict and humanitarian access constraints. The Geneva-based group Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor said Monday that the Famine Review Committee's inability to declare the current food situation in the Gaza Strip to be a famine does not negate the existence of a famine in the Strip, as pockets of famine are forming and spreading among different age groups, particularly children, and there has been a noticeable increase in deaths from hunger, malnutrition, and related diseases. The committee's failure to declare the existence of a famine is solely related to its inability to provide certain technological information because of the illegal Israeli restrictions and policies that aim to conceal evidence related to the crimes it commits and prevent criminal investigations into them by independent UN and international community, particularly by preventing these committees from entering the Strip, the group added. So the UN World Food Program, its director Cindy McCain, said last month that full-blown famine had taken hold in Gaza and was spreading south. According to Gazan officials, at least 40 people, mostly children, have died from malnutrition and dehydration during the 662-day Israeli onslaught. Most of the victims are from northern Gaza, although there have been a handful from Khan Yunis in the south. Israel began bombing and later invaded Gaza and after Hamas-led attacks left more than 1,100 Israelis and others dead. and over 240 others kidnapped on October 7th. At least some of the victims were killed by Israeli forces in so-called friendly fire incidents, according to Israeli and international media reports. Since then, Israeli forces have killed at least 37,626 Palestinians, most of them women and children, while wounding over 86,000 others, according to Palestinian and international agencies. At least 11,000 people, including over 4,000 children, are missing and presumed dead and buried beneath the rubble of hundreds of thousands of bombed out homes and other buildings. One thing I'd like to mention here is when we're talking about famine, my understanding is that the international definition to define famine is that you must have 2 out of 10,000 people in a region succumbing to hunger, deprivation, wasting, dehydration on a daily basis. And from the numbers coming out of Gaza, my guess is they're not quite there. Of course, the problem is once you're already in famine, then you have dozens of children dying every single day. And, you obviously don't want to get to that level of hunger. All right, few stories on the situation here with Lebanon before I wrap up. Israeli officials signal coming war in Lebanon. So this one from the 24th at antiwar.com. Top Israeli officials have laid out plans to reduce military operations in Gaza to gear up for war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. U.S. military officials have warned that Tel Aviv's missile defenses could be overwhelmed and Iran may enter the war. Countries around the globe are instructing their citizens to avoid Lebanon. On Sunday, Netanyahu explained to Israeli Channel 14, after the intense phase is finished in Gaza, we will have the possibility to remove part of the forces north, and we will do this first and foremost for defensive purposes, and secondly, to bring our evacuated residents home. If we can, we will do this diplomatically. If not, we will do it another way, but we will bring the residents home. Netanyahu did not provide a timeline, only saying the intense operations in Gaza will soon come to an end. At the same time, the Israeli leader ruled out ending the war in the Strip, saying he will halt the onslaught after Hamas is eliminated and Iran's intentions to destroy us have been neutralized. So my guess is that the war in Gaza, this intense phase, is going to continue for a couple more weeks. Last week, Amos Hochstein, the Biden's envoy or deputy, was in the Middle East, and that's why he told the Lebanese leader that he had spent 5 more weeks, so now 4 more weeks of intense fighting to go on in Gaza. And I would say that's probably the minimum that's typically it's been, that the Israelis will communicate to the U.S., we're planning on wrapping up in a few weeks here, and it's always longer than that. So U.S. officials have been warning of a wider war in the region. The White House believes bringing the fighting to a close in Gaza can end the fighting on Israel's northern border. Netanyahu's recent remarks suggest that a ceasefire in Gaza is unlikely anytime soon. While the U.S. could leverage military support for Israel to force Tel Aviv to de-escalate, Washington has pledged it will continue to come to Israel's aid should a larger conflict break out. However, U.S. defense officials have warned that the Pentagon may be unable to provide some of the aid that Tel Aviv would need, and Israel's air defenses could be overwhelmed. While Netanyahu indicated that a diplomatic solution on the northern border was possible, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said that the window of opportunity is closing, adding that Israel will not put up with the situation where residents of the north can't be returned to their homes. U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, also said that Iran could come to Hezbollah's aid should Israel invade southern Lebanon. Netanyahu claimed that Israel was already fighting a multi-front war, declaring we can fight on several fronts and we're prepared to do that. The global community is taking the risk of wider conflict seriously. Canada is making plans to evacuate its 45,000 citizens from Lebanon, while a host of other countries, including Kuwait, have instructed their citizens not to travel to the country. country. The German foreign minister, that's Alina Baerbock, said Berlin was extremely concerned about the potential war between Israel and Hezbollah and vowed to visit Beirut on Tuesday in an effort to resolve the tensions. And it doesn't seem like it's getting better. This one from the 25th, I wrote for antiwar.com. White House tells Lebanon U.S. cannot control Israel. While meeting with top Lebanese officials last week, President Biden's envoy warned Beirut that Washington could not stop Tel Aviv from ramping up its military operations in southern Lebanon. The White House is concerned that the tit-for-tat exchanges across the Israel-Lebanon border will soon escalate to a full-scale war. During a trip to the Middle East last week, President Biden's deputy Amos Hochstein told Lebanese leaders that Washington would be unable to constrain Tel Aviv. According to Axios, Hochstein warned the U.S. won't be able to hold back Israel if the situation on the border continues to escalate, and Hezbollah needs to indirectly negotiate with Israel instead of ratcheting up tensions. Hezbollah responded to the message by informing the U.S. that it was prepared to fight with Israel. During a trip to Washington this week, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Both American officials attempted to push Tel Aviv to avoid escalation along its northern border. On Monday, Blinken met with Gallant and promised that U.S. would aid Israel's military. He also underscored the importance of avoiding further escalation of the conflict and reaching a diplomatic resolution that allows Israelis and Lebanese families to return to their homes. And a State Department press release said Secretary Blinken reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel's security. After Gallant met with Austin on Tuesday, the two defense chiefs held a press conference where, again, the American Defense Secretary expressed his concern about the war expanding. He said, "I am extremely concerned about the rise in rocket attacks on Israel's north from Lebanese Hezbollah. Another war between Israel and Hezbollah could easily become a regional war with terrible consequences for the Middle East, and so diplomacy is by far the best way to prevent more escalation." Gallant, for his part, used the meeting to focus on Iran. He stated during the presser, "The greatest threat to the future of the world and to the future of the region is Iran, and time is running out. Now is the time to realize the commitment of American administration over the years to promise to prevent Iran from possessing nuclear weapons." For years, Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have claimed that Iran is on a quest to build nuclear weapons. However, the U.S. intelligence community and the International Nuclear Watchdog, the IAEA, continue to find that Tehran is not attempting to weaponize its civilian nuclear program. The White House continues to insist it has little leverage over Israeli government to bring a halt to the fighting in Gaza or Lebanon. However, as Secretary Austin noted in his presser with Gallant, Washington lavishes Tel Aviv with billions in military assistance each year. So far, Biden has refused to condition that support on Israel's conduct in any of the conflicts it is waging. All right, so this could get worse for the U.S. Iraqi militia threatens U.S. troops if Biden bats Israeli war in Lebanon. So I wrote this one for antiwar.com on June 25th. So I write, as the potential for a significant escalation in the conflict between Israel and Lebanon continues to grow, an Iraqi militia warns it will be targeting U.S. forces if Washington continues to support Tel Aviv. The leader of the militia, Asal al-Haq, in a televised speech on Monday, stated recently, "We have noticed leads indicating that uprising Israeli entity intends to expand its operations by attacking beloved Lebanon and the Mujahideen in Hezbollah. These leads suggest that the United States of America will continue to support this entity." He added that if the U.S. continues to support Israel, then America should know it will put all its interests in the region, particularly Iraq, at risk and make them a target. So the militia is an influential Iraqi Shia organization with a militant and political arm that holds 17 seats in the Iraqi parliament. The armed wing is a member of the Axis of Resistance, a collection of militaries that includes Iran's IRGC Quds Force, Iraq as well as the Syrian Shiite militias, the Houthis, and Lebanese Hezbollah. All of those are generally associated with the fight against the U.S., Israel, and jihadist forces in the region. The Iraqi foreign minister expressed concern that war in Lebanon will pervade the region. If there is an attack on southern Lebanon, God forbid, it will affect the whole region. Adding, expanding the war is not the only danger to Lebanon, but also the entire region. This is something that has been echoed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We talked about that already. And top officials in Israel say Hezbollah is running out of time to withdraw from Lebanon's southern border before Tel Aviv orders an assault. Hezbollah says the conflict with Israel, which so far has been limited to daily exchanges of rocket fire and bombs, could end if Tel Aviv ends the onslaught in Gaza. And Netanyahu made it clear he will not have that happen. Last article here today is by our friend Connor Freeman. This one titled, Houthi, Iraqi militias increase drone attacks on U.S. and Israeli targets. So Yemen's Houthis and the Islamic resistance of Iraq have carried out a spate of attacks over the weekend against U.S. occupation forces in Syria, Israeli-linked shipping, and other parts of their campaign against Tel Aviv's Gaza slaughter. Primarily, drones have been used for these retaliations against the U.S. and Israeli aggressions. The Islamic resistance is an umbrella group of Shia militia fighters against the American forces occupying Iraq and Syria since the U.S.-backed Israeli onslaught in Gaza broke out. On Saturday, following the U.S. bombing of Shiite militias in Syria, which killed at least one fighter, the Islamic resistance of Iraq launched drone strikes at the U.S. military base in Al-Tanaf outpost in Homs, Syria. This illegal base is located near the shared border with Jordan, and Iraq. These groups took credit for the attack, but no damage or casualties have been reported. The Iraqi group collaborated with Yemen's Houthis, formerly known as Ansar Allah, on the drone strike the same day, which targeted 4 vessels at Israel's Haifa port. The Houthis' military spokesperson said the resistance access groups targeted 2 cement tankers as well as 2 cargo ships, and for not complying with the Houthis' declared blockade on the ports of occupied Palestine. He said the Houthis also attacked a Southern Express ship in the Mediterranean Sea using drones, adding both missions successfully achieved their goals. Earlier this month, the Houthi leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, said that these operations, supported by the Islamic resistance of Iraq against any ships docked in Israeli ports, will persist in solidarity with the Palestinians. Al Jazeera described the Israeli response, knowing that Israel's Channel 12 reported an explosion occurred in Haifa at dawn after air defense missiles were launched towards the sea without activating the sirens. Israel's military did not comment on the Houthi claim, but stated in a post on X that it had shot down a drone approaching the country from the east. U.S. Central Command CENTCOM denied the attack took place, but said it had shot down 3 Houthi drones in the last 24 hours. CENTCOM also added that the Yemeni group launched 3 anti-ship missiles into the Gulf of Aden, but no damage or injuries were reported. The British Maritime Security Agency, UK MTO, reported another Houthi attack on Sunday aimed at a merchant ship traversing the Red Sea. According to UK MTO, although damage was inflicted, no injuries were documented and the ship was able to proceed onto its next port call. CENTCOM confirmed that the ship was the Transworld Navigator and added there were minor injuries among the crew members. The Houthi spokesperson claimed the attack, saying that the rebels targeted the ship. He claimed without offering evidence that the rebels instead used a drone boat in the attack, something contradicted by every other report on the assault, the AP notes. The maritime watchdog run by the UK Navy said the separate attack was detected on Sunday close to Yemen's Nash-Turn port and urged vessels to remain cautious. All right, everybody, that'll do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. More on another show tomorrow.